Good evening from the Gail Lemron Auditorium on the campus of Embry-Riddle. Welcome to the Embry-Riddle Speaker Series event for tonight. In our first presentation during National Black History Month, we are doing something very, very different. The pictures and the visions of what is beyond our shores, what is below the water. Tonight, a very special presentation about treasure and history from someone who has seen it all. You'll see a presentation that takes about 35 minutes. It shows you the pictures and explanation of what lies beyond our waters. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure. I'm Marc Bernier, the moderator for tonight, where we'll have a Q&A session that immediately follows the presentation as I introduce our guest. He is a NASA engineer with many years still to go in his career at NASA, but he has another life, diving with a purpose. The lead instructor and his presentation tonight, Erik Denson.
I just want to thank you for having me here. I feel very humble being here. Very excited. I have two loves and passions. As he mentioned, I'm an engineer. I work for NASA. That was always been a dream of my life, to work for NASA. So I have, my passion is air and space, and my other passion is underwater. So, and I've been lucky enough to experience a little bit of both. Give you a little bit of background about myself. I am the president of Diverse Orlando, which is an affiliate of the NASA Association of Black Scuba Divers here in the Central Florida area. I am a PADI dive master. I am one of the lead instructors for the Diving with a Purpose program. I'm also a scientific diver with NOAA and the National Park Service. And again, I am not an underwater archaeologist, but my passion, as you'll see here, has allowed me to gain a lot of experience with it. So I'm just going to talk briefly about the Diving with a Purpose program, and then I really want to jump into the exciting missions that I'm going to talk about tonight. So just give you a little overview. The program started as a volunteer program with the National Park Service, and it has really expanded well beyond its borders, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And it's a nonprofit organization, and our goal is to provide education. We do missions, field schools, and we do it also with youth. We have a youth program, a youth diving with a purpose, and we teach them the same underwater archaeology principles. But our special focus is on non-mainstream archaeology. And what I mean by that, i.e. slave trades, slave shipwrecks, and that type of thing. Typically, when you hear about underwater archaeology, what do we think about? We think about the Titanic. We think about Spanish galleons, Mel Fisher, and all of the gold and treasure. But there are more treasures that lie underneath. And these are cultural treasures. This is a heritage in our history, and it needs to be told. Let me tell you a little bit how it started. This program started back in 2003. Members of the National Association of Black Scuba Divers were asked to participate in a documentary called the Guerrero Project. And this was based upon a book written by Gail Swanson. And the documentary centered around the search for the Guerrero and this really, really unique story, which I'm going to go into a little bit later. It also told a story about treasure hunters and archaeologists and their opposing views. And how our program got started, the late Brenda Lesendorf, she was the only archaeologist in the Biscayne National Park. And she had lots of shipwrecks there that needed to be documented, but she didn't have a staff. So conversations started with Ken Stewart. He's the program director. And made kind of a deal here and said, okay, she said, well, we're going to train you guys in underwater archaeology principles. So when we do a search for the Guerrero, you will actually know what you're doing. Because when we participated in the documentary, to be honest, I think they just wanted some black divers to participate in the documentary. And we went around kind of faked what we were doing. I mean, a shipwreck would have hit me in the head and I wouldn't have known it at that time. But, through the program itself, we became educated and on the underwater archaeology principles, research, and, became pretty good at what we're doing now. I'm going to talk briefly by one of our accomplishments. We partnered with the George Washington University and also the Smithsonian Institute and the Museum of South Africa, and we participated and joined the African Slave Wrecks Project. And that project is targeting slave ships that are around the world. And one of the expeditions, I didn't take place of this one, but this one was at Sao Jose, and it was off the coast of South Africa in Cape Town. And we actually recovered shackles that you see there. And all of this became, and are alone now, in the new National African American Museum. So we actually have an exhibit there from some of the artifacts that we did there. One of the reasons why I didn't go on that particular expedition, I don't know if you know, that water is very cold. Water's like 40 degrees. And so actually one of our divers who went on there, he said he jumped in the water. He was like Jesus. He ended up walking on it and trying to get out of the water. So we have some really exciting ones that are coming up. Now I'm going to talk about two of my favorite expeditions that we've been upon. And these are the two that I'm going to concentrate on tonight. The first one is the Guerrero, the slave ship Guerrero, and I talked a little bit briefly how it got started. But in 1827, the Guerrero sunk off the coast of Key Largo. At the time in 1827, slavery was actually, transportation of slaves was actually illegal. And so the Guerrero was being chased by a British Navy ship called the Nimble. And as it was being chased, the Guerrero and also the Nimble ended up crashing onto a reef right outside of Key Largo, off the coast of Key Largo. 561 Africans were aboard the Guerrero at the time when it did wreck. I think it was 41 of the Africans died and drowned during that time. But the interesting story is that, let me go back. So the Nimble and also the Guerrero were both stranded on this reef. And what happens is we have what they call good Samaritans, or wreckers they call them, and they would come help and try to grab the ships off the reef. But as I mentioned, the Guerrero was a pirate ship. So what do pirates do? They hijacked the ones that came to help, and they also took some of the slaves, and they ended up going to Cuba, and some of them became slaves in Cuba. But 120 of them were rescued and actually spent some time in Key West. And eventually, over time, they were actually freed and went back to Liberia. So it is a very interesting story, and I highly suggest if you get a chance to get the book or get the documentary on the slave ship Guerrero. And there is an African cemetery that's located in Key West, and some of those who had survived are maybe buried in that African cemetery, as well as some of the other slave shipwrecks that would happen there. Now I'm going to talk about the actual mission. We've conducted two missions to search for the Guerrero, one in 2010 and one in 2012. We had an opportunity to do maps and bring up some of the artifacts, and I'll talk a little bit about those in the coming slides here. And our mission was documented by PBS. Has anybody ever seen Changing Seas? It's a documentary series. It's a PBS, very good. And we were in one of the episodes called Sunken Stories. It's a very, very interesting documentary. So we're still doing research, but we did bring up a lot of artifacts, and I'll talk about those. We use magnetometers. Go back there. We use a lot of magnetometers and other means to try to uncover artifacts. And I'll discuss a few of them. We found a lot of glass fragments and glass bottle fragments. And you say, well, what's so special and what's so exciting about glass and fragments of glass? But these tell us a story. Just like some of you know, back in the 50s, Coke bottles had all different types of designs, but then they went by the wayside. We went by cans and different things like that. So looking at those glasses, it can tell you a period, maybe when that wreck was there. Also, too, the origin of the country of origin. It tells a story. So the different types of jars or bottles may come from a specific country or a different time period. So this is very helpful empirical evidence. We found cologne bottles, part of another vase, a runner, what they call a rum runner. Lots of ceramics. And then definitely they call them pearlware or earthenware. And again, that gives us a time period. And a lot of these artifacts did correlate to the time period of the Guerrero, which help us enforce our thought process of that site being the Guerrero. We found different pieces of jewelry, and this is an interesting artifact. It's called a clister. Oh, it's a French word, but it really is. It's an enema. So it was part of an enema. Now you got to think, maybe these guys, they didn't eat a lot of fruit and vegetables, so they had to do what they had to do. Other things we found were pieces of wood. We actually were able to recover some of these things, and we knew that the Guerrero was made of white oak and actually from the northeast. And so we brought up different pieces of wood from the wreck, and we did carbon dating and also found out that it was that type of wood, and it did correlate to the type that was built for the Guerrero. We found copper fasteners and copper sheathing. And if you don't know what copper sheathing is, it's a way to reinforce the hull, and actually you put sheets of copper around the wooden hull to reinforce it. And we knew the Guerrero had copper sheathing. We found lots of rigging, which is part of, for your ropes and your sails. We found iron knees that are used to reinforce the keels and the hull. So we found those. Interesting, we found lead shots, musket shots, and we found, what this is? We found barbells. No, it's not actually a barbell, but it looks like it. When I first went down there, I was like, I found a barbell. What the heck is a barbell doing around on a slave ship? But it's actually not. Maybe some of you know what it is. But think about pirates. What do pirates want to do with other ships? Do they want to sink it? No, they want to steal it, right? So this is a unique item. They actually shoot this out of a cannon, and what it does is, rotates like this, and they shoot it up into the other ship's rigging to disable it, and then they're able to basically hijack it. So it's very interesting. I didn't learn that until I started doing underwater archaeology, and that's actually one picture of one up there. We found encrusted coconuts. No, they're not coconuts, but when I'm down there, they look like a coconut, but you said coconuts will float, right? Oh. So these sunk, and so we found coral encrusted cannonballs, and cannonballs come in different sizes, different weights, and this correlated to the weight of cannons that we knew the Guerrero had. And we have to do some kind of restoration on some of these. Again, that's covered with coral, and you can see they're doing some restoration, trying to remove the coral. And so there's different processes that they have to do to recover some of that artifacts. And one of the other interesting things we found was the anchor there. This big, huge anchor you can see in the middle picture there. And we knew by account that the Nimble, the British Navy ship that was chasing the Guerrero, when it got stuck on the reef, we knew it dropped its anchor. And so we found that anchor there, and we think that was from the British Navy ship Nimble. So they were actually conducted some more expeditions last year. They found another cannon, a Cannondale. We've been using a little bit more aggressive techniques, such as with the vacuum to remove silt and sand around there. Still no smoking gun. Nothing that said, this is the Guerrero, this is, the ship's bell. But we found a lot of empirical evidence, and we went to other different sites too that we thought might be candidates, and we were able to knock those out. So everything is leaning towards that initial site being the site of the Guerrero. And remember, this is in very shallow water too. This is in shallow water anywhere from 15 to 20 feet deep. So parts of the ship are gone, from hurricanes, storms, and just over time. So the little pieces of artifacts that are shown is what we've been able to find so far. Now I'm going to switch gears a little bit. I'm going to talk about another exciting mission. And this one is really, really, really dear to my heart. As I mentioned, I'm a big air and space person as well as diving. But the Tuskegee Airmen are, and I assume most of you know that these were African American pilots, World War II pilots, and they were in a program that was supposed to prove that they could not fly. And they proved just the opposite. They became some of the best pilots in the world during World War II. And so, again, I'm sorry if I get a little teary-eyed sometimes when I talk about this project. But one little known fact that I didn't know about it, that after they completed training in Tuskegee, Alabama, that's where they trained, Tuskegee Institute, they went to further training in Michigan. I said, I didn't know Tuskegee Airmen were up in Michigan. And what they did was they trained up there because it kind of mimicked the European theater, the European terrain, and climate and that type of thing. So it provided additional training for them. And so 2 Tuskegee Airmen plane wrecks were found up in the Michigan area. One in Lake Huron and the other in the St. Clair River. And this is the aircraft they were flying, was a P-39 Airacobra. Everybody knows the Tuskegee Airmen with the P-51 Mustang, the real cool plane. But they were training and using that particular aircraft for training up there. Now we only documented one of the Tuskegee Airmen crashes. And I got this from one of the other research papers. And actually, this is one of the first times that I actually put this in my presentation. And this was an account, I'm going to read it verbatim, of an account of one of the persons that actually witnessed the crash. It was the most horrible thing I have ever witnessed, she said. There were 4 planes, and I was watching them from our front window, as I usually do when they're engaged in gunnery practice. Then everything happened so fast, it seems unbelievable. Smoke started coming from the tail of the second plane, and I could see it was in trouble. The pilot apparently noticed it and tried to lift the ship. It was a feeble effort, for the plane seemed to lift for only a few feet, and then it crashed nose first into the water. I saw a big splash, and then the plane went out of sight. Lieutenant Moody's body washed up on shore on June 4th, 1944. That was 2 days before D-Day, the invasion of Normandy. What's even really more interesting, too, about this particular flight, if you can read that first bullets up there. The wreck was originally found in 2014 by a sheriff up in the Lake Huron, Port Huron area. He found a cockpit door, and at the time he thought it was part of an automobile door, so he thought maybe there was some kind of automobile accident. So they did some further investigation and found some other aircraft parts. But if you look at that second part of that sentence, the aircraft was discovered on April 11th, 2014, 70 years to the exact date of the accident. If that doesn't give you chills, I don't know what does. I mean, that was, really? Wow, you can't write this stuff. So we put together a small team. It was led by NOAA. I think I mentioned before, we do most of our work with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration or the National Park Service. Wayne Lusardi is the head archaeologist for the state of Michigan, and very big proponent of the Tuskegee Airmen and what they've done. So back in 2015, we put together a week-long mission to document the Lake Huron accident site and the plane flown by Lieutenant Frank Moody. As you can see up here, we had a very large boat vessel here for all 7 of us, and that's Ernie Franklin. So we were really jammed up in that boat. Our base of operations was the Coast Guard station at Port Huron, Michigan, and that's the St. Clair River, and on one side is Canada, and the other side is the United States. And I remember being on the boat and I had my cell phone, and my cell phone kept going in and out saying I was international calling and everything, so I had to be careful. But it was a very beautiful place. They have a river walk area that was very, very beautiful. Just to give you an idea of what we were working with and how artifacts, so we call them artifacts, but it was just parts of the plane that were spread out all over the place. You can see the scale there. It says 420 feet. Unfortunately, the pointer's not working here, but you can see how it's just spread out. You have an instrument panel over here. You have the engine in the middle section, tail over here, the wings over here. So that illustrates the violence of this crash and how it was spread out all over. Now, this is one of my favorite pictures. That's Wayne Lusardi, the archaeologist, state archaeologist. I'm the one that actually took these pictures, so that's why I'm not in this particular one. But this is one of my favorite pictures, and actually, it almost brought tears to my eyes when I was down there. This is the wing. You can see the wing of the aircraft. And when I saw that star, that military star, and that's why I almost cried on the water, so I know that Lieutenant Frank Moody gave his life. And I could see that star. And you can see another section of the wing. And we had to clean it off. It was covered with algae and some moss, and they have zebra mussels there now. We found lots of parts of the aircraft. This is a drawing of the engine and also the drive shaft, and you can see that's the picture of the engine and the drive shaft. Over here on the left, that's part of the tail. You can see that. As well over here, this is the propeller, part of the propeller. This is a cockpit door. And that was one of the first things that I saw. We never found the other one. Only found one. Landing gear. And you can see up there, the top corner, you can still see the rubber on the tires. Really amazing after all these years. Some parts of it almost look like it could fly again. They were doing actual training, gunnery training, doing strafing runs and target practicing. We found 50 caliber machine guns on the floor, on the sea floor. That's a picture of me next to one of those 50 caliber machine guns. We found 3 of them and a gun pod. The sea floor was littered with 50 caliber rounds. They were all over the place, hundreds of them. And you can see, and I think I have it in my bag there. They're good size rounds. They're pretty big. And so we had to be careful too, because they were actually live rounds. You never know. You don't want to disturb them. And so we had to be very careful. Now, this is one of the most important finds here. This was the instrument panel. And you can see some of the gauges that were still there. And it was interesting in the fact, too, it was sitting all by itself, nothing else around. And we were able to find that, and still see some of the dials and everything on it. But what made this really the most important artifact that we found was that in the corner, that radio call number. You know why? Because that is unique to every aircraft. So we were able to know what the aircraft was and who was flying it. And that's how we found out. We do drawings of the different artifacts as well as photos like you saw there. Wayne Lusardi, the archaeologist, he's obviously very talented with his drawings. And this just shows you where some of the artifacts in the pictures correlate to. This top one is actually part of the cockpit. It's actually bulletproof glass that would go behind the cockpit. Beacon up in the top. You can see here again the star, part of the wing, and also the landing gear again, as well as the drive shaft. I'm going to show just a little video clip And this actually is video of just running down the wing. And again, you can see the star there. And Lake Huron is not very colorful. It's not Florida Keys, so it actually looked like that, very gray. And again, you can see the landing gear right there to the side. The dry shaft. And this is only one section of the wreck. Again, remember I pointed out in the other map, this was probably our main section that we were mapping and documenting, but like the engine block, the tail, the instrument panel, all spread out all over. Again, that's another landing gear. And again, you can see, you can almost read Firestone on it. Really amazing. And actually the wing is one piece and it's pretty long, even though other side of it was missing. Yeah, I think that's it. So we concluded our mission. We placed a little small reef there. We concluded our mission with a visit to the National Tuskegee Airmen Museum, and that's located in Detroit, Michigan. And so we had conversation with them about maybe bringing up some artifacts, some of the wreckage, and actually displaying that into the museum. We are also, we applied for a grant to actually do a permanent monument along the coast where the accident took place. And we're also thinking about doing one down for the Guerrero. One interesting story, though, while we were visiting there, and this is another one that'll kind of give you chills. Ernie Franklin, one of the participants in the DWP program, he's the one all the way to the right there. He's a Detroit native. He's also a graduate of Tuskegee University. And so we were inside of the museum, and we were looking through some of the archives and the pictures, and he looked and said, "That's my math teacher." His math teacher was a Tuskegee Airman, and he did not even know that. Did not know that, so he discovered that right there in the museum. But here's the kicker. His math teacher was in the same class as Lieutenant Frank Moody, the pilot we were just documenting. Again, you can't write this stuff. You can't write this stuff. So again, that does another chilling moment. So I think we were all destined to do this project. And we were destined to continue to tell the story of the Tuskegee Airmen. We were destined to tell the story of the Guerrero and those that have lost their lives during the slave trade. So we were definitely destined to do this. And I think that is it, what I have for right now, and I know it'll be time to have some questions and dialogue and go from there. But I thank you so much for allowing me to speak.
Have a seat. Good job. Good job. Please. Before I go any further, I want to thank Ken Hunt, the Department of Inclusion and Diversity, for making this possible tonight, and his friendship, and thank you for partnering with us in the speaker series. We're going to take questions from the audience for students shortly, so start thinking of your question. I got to ask a very broad question to start. And what got you into diving? Was it an experience as a youth? What made you want to do this?
Man, I get that question all the time. And I was born and raised in New York. I grew up swimming in the public pools of New York. And actually, I don't remember not knowing how to swim. It was just something I always loved. I couldn't wait till the summertime came to get in the water. And I remember my cousin, she gave me this mask, old Jacques Cousteau mask. And I'm jumping in the beach, Long Beach in New York. And I still couldn't see much. There's not much to see up there. But I thought it was the coolest thing to have on that mask. But I really didn't get into it until I moved here to Florida. And one of my friends, we snorkeled in Blue Springs up there, and I saw other divers there. And I was like, wow, this is really something cool. And I knew I loved the water, so I wanted to try it, so I wanted to get certified. And then also, I became aware of the National Association of Black Scuba Divers. And I found other divers of color, and we started a club, and just kind of grew from there.
Okay.
And it's been one of my most rewarding experiences of my life.
Your wife, Barbara, is here. Did you
Yes.
guys meet on a diving expedition?
Not at all.
Because she dives.
Yes, she does, and I'll tell a little story about that too. But I didn't mention, I'm a graduate of Howard University, Washington, D.C.
Excellent.
And actually, we met through a friend in Washington, D.C. when I was there on assignments, and we kept running into each other. So eventually that clicked. But before we got married, she didn't even know how to swim. And so my wife, my baby, she was just never afraid of the water. And before I knew it, we had little swimming lessons, and now she's an advanced diver, nitrox diver, has over 150 dives. And so she loves the water just like me.
Congratulations. When you decide that you're going to do this and you're going to look for these treasures, do you have to meet with people from the Division of Parks that say, okay, you can look, but you can't touch because you're not an archeologist?
Right,
Did you need to bring one with you?
Yeah. Well, actually, most of the programs that we do, we already start out with an archaeologist. They're called principal investigators usually. So usually all of these missions is either in collaboration with NOAA, National Park Service, and in some cases the Smithsonian. So we always have a resident archaeologist, if you will, that goes through the legal process that they're degreed and they know exactly what we're doing. As divers, we're more of the fins in the water, boots on the ground type of people that do the work. We do the mapping, we do the pictures, we do the drawings, do kind of the grunt work, which is the dirty part of archaeology. And the archaeologists, they'll do the research and try to get us to look at certain things, artifacts, and they're the ones that usually come up with the missions to say, hey, we think we got some interesting wrecks here, so let's talk about doing those particular ones.
Did you ever dive and then suddenly found somebody else was diving at the same time and you went, uh-oh, we got here first? Did that ever happen?
Well, actually, it happens sometimes at some of the sites that we're doing. We're actually setting up grids and doing our documentation, and then there's a pleasure dive boat that lets divers over, and they come right through what we're doing and everything too. We say, call time out, wait a minute, get away.
Yeah.
So that does happen sometimes.
Can you actually catalog somehow while you're underwater? Okay, we found this, we found this. How do you keep track?
Well, we actually do that. We will write down what we're documenting, actually doing drawings. Those drawings that I showed were actually done underwater. We have what they call mylar paper. It's kind of like a wax type of paper, and we use regular pencils, and we actually draw underwater. We do our sketches and measurements and everything right there real time underwater.
We have a special fondness for the Tuskegee Airmen here. We had 3 of them in an interview here in this very auditorium a few years ago. Some of you were even here for it. Remarkable stories of bravery. And you are absolutely right. They were cast off as being able to prove they couldn't fly, and they turned out to be the best aviators. Do we know what the backstory was which caused the accident to happen over Lake Huron, Eric?
No, other than that account, we think it was engine failure. Because from the account, it just smoke that came out there. And think about it, at the time of this accident, we were still at war, and they really didn't put any kind of effort in to try to recover the plane or try to find out what happened. They were really putting resources where they needed it at the time, because we were still at war.
Staying with this, with the Tuskegee, when the plane was found, does the Division of Parks or the Defense Department, do they jump in to help and say, we're going to resurrect, we're going to bring all of this out? What happens once you found it?
Well, that's interesting. It depends where it's found, and these are found in state waters. And actually, there's no involvement from them whatsoever, really. And unfortunately, like the one in the St. Clair River, it was found in kind of open public water, and it has been looted.
Really?
Yeah, so people were bringing up artifacts, machine guns, and different ammunition, and not respecting the site. So, and that happens a lot with a lot of different wrecks. So that's an unfortunate one in the St. Clair River. Actually, we saw a little documentary that somebody put together, and they had parts of the aircraft in their living room.
Wow, that's wild, isn't it? I would have thought that once that was found, it would be declared sort of a holy site, and then there'd be federal supervision, because this is a historic remnant. You know, people died in service to their country. I would have thought they would have wanted to protect it as almost a war memorial.
Yes, exactly. And then we're trying to push it. And unfortunately, again, the location of it can't be protected. And right now, we don't give out the location of the aircraft, the one in Lake Huron, just because of that reason.
Let me move to the Guerrero. Once that was discovered, this is international waters, I take it?
No, actually.
Still within the boundaries
yes,
of the 250?
This is actually in the National Marine Sanctuary, so we have a little bit better. It's on the borderline of the state waters and also the National Marine Sanctuary. So there's a better chance of that getting protected.
Because in anticipation of you coming today, I was wondering about the Interior Department. Would they not help protect this? Anything that's found off our waters, I would think that they would want to have some.
And in that case, because we actually did bring up some artifacts for the Guerrero, like I mentioned, we brought the cannonball, we brought pieces of wood. We had to go through the long, arduous process of getting permission, you know, from the state and the actual government to bring up those artifacts.
Who does the restoration? Like we saw the cannonballs. Are these your folks?
No. We have actually professional organizations, again, like NOAA, that will actually be responsible for taking care of those artifacts and restoring them. And the state or the government would not allow you to bring anything up unless you had a good plan how to maintain and restore those artifacts. You can bring it up and date it, but you have to have, a long-term plan, because a lot of the art, especially the metal, it's a long process, like electrolysis to remove the coral and incrustation, and that could take years. And so you have to have the facilities and the workforce to be able to do that. And they won't let you bring stuff up unless you have that plan and you can show that you're going to take care of those artifacts.
In Florida, many of those in our audience know that if you go to do any kind of excavation on property, on land, if you find wildlife, you cannot move it. You cannot do anything. What if you had some family of mammal or animal that was below? Are you allowed to disturb it?
Well, I guess if they're protected, we haven't run across that.
You haven't had that problem?
We haven't run across that problem.
How long do they let you dive for when you go down? How long can you stay?
Well, it depends on the depth, and most of these sites were very shallow. The Tuskegee Airmen was about 30 feet of water. The Guerrero was about in 20 feet of water. So some of you divers know that depending on your depth, you breathe much more volume of air because air is compressed. And so breath at 30 feet, when you're down in 100 feet, it's 3 times as much volume of air. And so with that depth, we were staying down pretty long, hour and a half on one tank, and we would do multiple tanks on dive.
Out of curiosity, is Diving with a Purpose a 501c3? Is that
Absolutely. Right? We are a nonprofit organization, 501c3.
So people can donate to keep
yes,
this
divingwithapurpose.org. And one of the things we're trying, a lot of the programs that we have is a youth program as well as an adult program, and we apply for grants. We got a lot of grants through the National Park Service to help subsidize the work that we do. This is all volunteer, so we take off our time, a vacation. We spend our own money to go down, pay for hotels, and so the actual grants have been helping us out. And we applied for a grant, like I mentioned, to develop and design those monuments and put down in Key Largo and also up in Michigan. So hopefully we'll get that grant and we can put a permanent marker, a permanent monument down there.
A distinguished career as a NASA engineer, did you ever think that if you could have lived your life over again that you would have done this?
That's interesting. I enjoy doing this. Would I do it for a living? Probably not. I really enjoy being an engineer and working for NASA. That was actually a love and something I wanted to do since I was a little kid. But it's so cool to have another good hobby like this too as well.
Is it misunderstood by the archaeological people that they say, hey, wait a minute, he's not, they don't, if they haven't read the story to hear about it, do they misunderstand what you do?
I haven't really ran across that too, because I don't try to portray an archaeologist by no means. I just like to spread the word about the missions and our program, what we're doing. And we do have degreed doctors archaeologists that are participating in this program that give us that credibility. So I haven't really run across that.
Do you have a dream dive that you want to do that you haven't done yet? You want to look for something somewhere else?
You know, also I would love to is a couple of places. I mean, my wife talked about going to Europe and diving in some of those. I've seen sunken cities in the Mediterranean. Also, I got a chance to dive in Egypt and the Red Sea, and I know there's like the city off of Alexandria. Cleopatra's palace is supposed to be underneath there. I've seen some really cool artifacts there, so that would be another trip I would love to do.
Anyone else in your family a diver or has this kind of interest?
And no, they all think I'm crazy. They don't think I'm crazy now. At first, you know, when I was doing this, I did a shark dive one time, and I was like, man, should I show my mother and father this? They're gonna really think I have lost it. But then I showed it to them. They were like, wow, that was incredible. And so, well, they know I was a little bit of a daredevil growing up and stuff like this.
Have you or your group ever been in danger? You've been diving and all of a sudden you came across something that you weren't expecting.
Well, I wouldn't say we've come across anything we haven't expected. Well, I shouldn't say that either. I mean, a lot of these artifacts that we bring up are unexpected.
Sea life, any dangerous sea life?
You know, we see sharks on a daily basis. I have never seen a great white, and I think if I do, that's maybe when I stop diving. But we see other types of sharks on a regular basis: nurse sharks, reef sharks, and barracudas, and all. They look at you and they go about their business. I believe in, you know, I don't mess with it; it won't mess with me, and that's usually what happens. So I'm good. I never had any bad experience with sea life, wildlife.
Let's take some questions from our audience. Students, come down here. We have a microphone set up on either end. That one needs to be adjusted a bit, but come down. And the general public, because this is a smaller setting, if you have a question for Erik, come right down and ask your question now during the time that we have. Get this on the record. Just, if you would, keep it to a simple question. And let's get as many voices on this program as possible.
Simple questions so I can try to answer them. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for being with us. You're first tonight. Right into the microphone. Thank you.
I'm a junior here. I am part of the Diving Eagle Scuba Club, and I've been certified since 2006. It's 1,000% one of my passions, and I'm wondering if there's any opportunities with your program for students like me to participate.
Absolutely. As I mentioned too, we have two programs. A youth program is called Youth Diving with a Purpose, and you can go right to our website, divingwithapurpose.org. And our program is a volunteer program. It is open to everybody. You don't have to have archaeology training. That's what we do. We'll teach it to you. And and for those of your divers, after you complete the program, you actually get a PADI certification for underwater archaeology survey divers. So our program is a PADI specialty. And so you don't need experience other than being in open water. We want you to have at least 50 dives logged. And that's because we want a little, you know, for you to have a little experience, because one of the biggest things you got to have doing this is good buoyancy control. We don't want you to interfere with the artifacts, the wreck, or especially once we have our grid and our baseline set up. That's the worst thing you do is screw up what we already did. So, but it's open, and it's open to everybody. We do the program twice a year for youth and adults, and we have kids from high school that participate in this program, as well as college. So go to that website, see we still have some openings. The next one is in July, June and July.
Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. Over here, your question. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Denson. Thank you for being here. My name is Sash Watacharya, and I'm a freshman here at Riddle, studying engineering. My question is, can you tell us about your deepest dive, and what was that like? How that
Everybody always likes the deep dive. Actually, it was in Belize. I'm not a technical diver, and so when you talk about technical diving, that's when you get into what we call mixed gases, heliox, and heliox is a mixture of helium and oxygen. So I try to stick more with recreational diving limits, but I have been 145 feet. That was my deepest. That's actually below normal recreation divers. That was in the Blue Hole in Belize. It's a sunken cave in the ocean, and it's just very beautiful. So my wife took me there.
Thank you. Over here, your question, and please feel free to raise that microphone. No one is 3 feet tall in this audience.
I don't know how to, but my name is Will. I'm an engineer here. It's one of the questions, one of the slides for the slave ship. You said that of the Africans that weren't kidnapped by the pirates or died in the wreck, the ones that did spend time in Cuba as virtual slaves. I was going to ask what like virtual slavery entailed.
Oh, actually, they call them. We call them virtual slaves. You mean the ones that were remained in Key West? So they were actually put in a little small community. They were barely fed. They were not treated very well. And then there were some good Samaritans, good people in Key West that did try to help them out. But they were virtual slaves because they were not allowed to leave. They had to stay there in Key West. They couldn't go anywhere. They did work to get some, food or what have you. And then eventually there was a lot of political things that went back and forth, and they eventually were sent back to Liberia.
There was a place called Monrovia that was created by, I think, President Monroe to resettle some that were taken from Africa to bring them back, and it was established as a colony. But these people were held in captivity in Florida?
Yes.
Like, with no place to go.
Really, yeah. Wow. They lived in small huts or in different types of things, if you will. Yeah.
Thank you, Eric. Your question. Good evening.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Hey,
You
Jack.
sort of caught my attention about the Port Huron, Marysville area. I just got back from watching icebreakers out in the lake because I grew up on the St. Clair River, and when I was in college, we used to competitively canoe, and that was out in the river, out by the Blue Water Bridge and out into the
That's
lake.
exactly where the Blue Water Bridge, that's what I showed over there.
Well, I saw it in the picture, so
Yeah.
I knew you were there.
Yeah, it's that beautiful area. Very
Yeah,
beautiful.
I enjoy it, but thank you for bringing that to my attention. I had never heard of it because I haven't been around that much. I was just up there for a month, but
Yeah, the River Walk is called the Blue River Walk.
Yeah.
Which has a lot of monuments and all that. That's where we would like to place the monument for the Tuskegee Airmen along that walkway near the bridge.
yeah.
Yeah.
But as far as ship anchors, yeah, I've known a bunch of divers, and I know people that have big freighter anchors in their yard.
Yeah.
So, yeah, when people find them, they sort of consider it's theirs.
Yeah, and
I guess-
unfortunately, same type of thing happened with.
Right, with
the
anything
plane
and
wreck.
everything, yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you very much, though.
yeah.
I want-
Thank you for sharing that.
Come back to something you said about you have to have a plan. Do you have to register like a manifest that this is what we're going to do at this time? Do you have to do any of that?
Yeah, I don't personally do that, but again, our principal investigator, they would log, especially they work for NOAA. It's the government, and so they have to have a whole project plan and everything they're going to do, and so.
Are the divers inspected by authorities or anything once they come up? Or is there anybody there to meet them, or you guys are really on your own?
Well, we're on our own except for when we're diving on a NOAA or a boat or a National Park Service boat. I'm a scientific diver. That means I was trained to actually dive off of a NOAA boat or National Park Service boat. You go through rigors of training, and so they check you out before you go, afterwards, and you have to do a lot. When we do our own boat, we do a little less rigor. So we still keep track of our divers and try to make everything as safe.
Good evening. Thank you for being with us. Your question now for Erik Denson.
Hi, good evening. My name is Lauren Herzog. I'm a junior here at Embry-Riddle. My question was, in the one slide, I saw you with a wreath, and I was wondering, was there any type of memorial, or were there still family members that were contacted, or any
good
part
question.
of this?
For the Tuskegee?
Yes.
Yeah, no, that's a very good question, and that was one of the things that we were trying to do. We were trying to locate any family members of Lieutenant Moody, and we're still looking, to be honest. And so when we do a monument, we would like to try to get his family there. So we do have some folks that are trying to locate his family.
Thank you.
Thank you. Your question.
Good evening. On the side of the Guerrero, how did you find where to look for it in the first place? Because you mentioned there was a lot of wreckage spread around, but where did you start looking? How did you know where to find the wreck?
We started out with that book and that documentary. Gail Swanson, who wrote the book called the Guerrero, the slave ship Guerrero, she did years and years of research. She spent, fortunately, almost every penny she had trying to do research. So we actually, started out with her book. There were different accounts of where the ship might be. And so there were a few sites that we thought that were credible. And so, we used her book and some other research to narrow it down to the areas that we wanted to investigate.
Was the Guerrero originally from Spain? Do we know?
I believe so. I'm trying to remember.
The reason I ask, I'm wondering if any other government has an interest in
Yeah, we
this
were
find.
talking about that earlier, and no.
Wow.
Yeah, and what's interesting again, and this is one of the reasons, and one of the things about our program, we try to bring things like this to light, because to them it's not really that interesting. It's not gold, and it's not, the history that people want to tell. So this is why our program exists to tell this story.
What I love about this story is that your heart is in the right place. You're touching human lives, people who died in either service to their country or died in situations they could not control. And you're going after the human factor, which is extremely noble. Over here, your question now for Erik.
Hi, I was wondering, what's the hardest thing you've ever done? Was it as an engineer or as a diver?
Wow.
Great question.
It is. I don't know if I can answer that. In both ways, there's been easy things and there's been hard things. Working for NASA has always been a challenge. It was get challenged intellectually and challenged to be innovative. So I look at that pretty hard too. And then sometimes diving can be challenging physically, being out there, especially this program. I tell Aubra, my wife, every time I come back from this program, I am pooped. I am tired because we go all day and into the evening. After we're diving all day, we go back to the dorms and we're doing our drawings and our mapping. So, yeah, that can be very tiring and difficult. So I come back, I say, I need a vacation from my vacation, so.
That's what I was wondering. Do you train for this? I mean, this is pretty intense. A couple of weeks, you take a couple of weeks off, accrued time at NASA, but it's not like, due respect, what you're doing all the time. I don't know, is it that physically enduring at NASA? Do you have to train to go away?
I don't really have to train for it, but I do dive a lot, so
stay
I
fit.
keep stay my skills more proficient, because during the summer months and most of the time, I'm diving every other week at least, try to dive as much as I can, so it keeps that up.
Over here, your question.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. My name is Jennifer Roberts. I'm a faculty member at Embry-Riddle Worldwide College of Aeronautics. I also love diving. I've been to the Blue Hole in Belize. Amazing. But one thing when I'm diving that always really amazes me are the people who can point out like the tiny things, oh, look at that, and I would completely miss it. So when I saw the pictures of the artifacts that you found, some of them are so small, and to me, I feel like I might miss them. So I'm wondering, what do you guys do in preparation before you go on a dive like that, so you know what you're looking for?
That is a very, very good question. And I think when I started out talking about this, again, when I first started doing this, I remember our first archaeological dive. I went down and we went to this site, and I said, I don't see anything. There's nothing down there. There's no wreck down there. And then as we progressed through the days, I started to see, wow, yes, there's one over there. There's still over there. So it takes a little while to get that eye, and then you start looking for things that don't occur naturally in nature, right angles, different odd shapes, and that type of thing. But to prepare also, too, if we think we're doing a 19th century sailing vessel, we give out information about ship construction, about that date. So if we run across some artifacts, we understand, oh, this may be part of the keel, this may be a mast step, this may be, different parts of the ship. So we try to become familiar with artifacts that we might come across even before we start diving.
On either of these two dives, was it difficult to see what you were looking for at any point?
Well, as far as visibility, on both dives, the visibility was pretty decent. But again, it's really hard to locate things because they're encrusted with coral or covered with algae. They start to take on the shapes and forms and colors of the natural environment. So that's the hardest part about it. They become camouflaged, if you will.
And you have detecting units that you take with you that may pick up
We
the
do
metals?
we do that sometimes. We showing the picture. We have metal detectors and all, but actually most of the time we don't. We just use visual inspection and just taking our time to look around the terrain in the wreck site to expose it.
Your questions are also very good. We still have time for a few more. If anybody wants to line up in these minutes we have left, you're next with Eric. Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Alex Schiffer. I'm a engineering student and avid diver. I was just curious, being an engineer at NASA, if you've ever gone diving in the neutral buoyancy laboratory.
No, but I sure would want to. That is I don't know if you guys know what he's talking about. That's where the astronauts train for missions underwater. It's like a 60-foot deep pool. At one point in time, they had a full mock-up of the shuttle in this pool. And now they have basically almost, I would say, a full mock-up of the space station. But the astronauts actually go there to do training for their spacewalks. And you think about it, that is the best way to mimic weightlessness is underwater, and that's how they practice. Everybody always thinks that we got some anti-gravity chamber somewhere for NASA, but no, that doesn't exist. We don't have one of those. But anyway, I went there. And I was like, wow, I want to jump in this water and dive. And they actually treat it like a spacewalk. They have a control center up there with cameras and everything. They have like a mission control, and they go through the actual rigor and practice of a spacewalk there. I know I haven't, but I'm working on it. Oh, I want to mention one other thing too about that. Well, another thing that NASA does, there's Aqueous Lab. I don't know if everybody's familiar with that. Aqueous Lab is the only underwater lab that the United States have, and it's off the coast of Key Largo too. Astronauts do training there as well. And it's actually a lab where not just NASA, but also different marine biologists, they do experiments there, and they spend days, weeks underwater at that lab. And that's the only ongoing lab that we have here in the United States. Very cool too.
Thank you. Good evening and welcome.
Hi, my name is Taylor. I'm an engineer here. When you were talking about the wing and the Tuskegee Airmen flight, and you said that it almost brought tears to your eye, I was wondering if there was any other artifacts that just completely took your breath away.
Well, that was definitely the tops. Yeah, I don't think anything more than that one so far. The Guerrero one, I didn't find anything that really took my breath away. I mean, it's always cool to find cannons and cannonballs. I mean, that's always cool. But it was nothing. If I saw something like shackles, or I'll pull something out of my pocket right here.
Another barbell?
This is an artifact that we were looking for, something like this that would tell us that this was a slave ship. And I would like to end, or just about end, and talk about this. And I'm glad you brought this up because this reminded me. I forgot I had it in my pocket because I took that slide out of my presentation. This is a brass manila. And I don't know if any of you know actually what a manila is, except for if you were in my presentation earlier. This was actually used as currency and actually used to buy and sell slaves. This is a brass manila. You can look it up on the internet. And one of the things when I talk about cultural treasures, I talk about things like this, things that mean so much, may not mean a lot as far as money, but they mean so much. And I'll tell you a little history, a little story about this and how I got it. This actually came from a slave ship that was sunk here in Florida. And you can see it's green, and it was brass, but because it was under salt water for a while, that's why it turned green. But you know where I got this from? I got this from a little store in Tampa over by the beach. And it was in a little plastic bag. It did say the wreck that it came from. and they had no idea what it was and why I was there. And so I got on my soapbox and I told them that, you know, they use this to trade human lives. And I got this for like $20.
Wow, what an amazing thing. How long have you had it?
Oh, since we started this program.
2000?
So I've had it for about at least, I guess, 13 years, 12, 13
Wow.
years. And the only reason why I knew about it is because of this program and about the Guerrero when we started doing research about it.
I can't let you go without asking you a little bit about NASA. Tell us about what you do there.
Well, that's my day job, and it's still cool. I'm the electrical chief engineer for NASA. One of the main thing that I'm working on is the space launch system. And basically, that's the new big rocket that'll hopefully take us to Moon and Mars. And we should have our first test flight in about 1.5 years. Now, I know who saw the SpaceX launch last week. It was very, very cool. Our rocket will even be bigger, better than that one. So a lot of people think NASA's out of business.
Yeah, that's where I was going.
You know what? I've been the busiest I've been in my whole career because, you know, after one thing ends, we're in the design and development phase of another project. And SpaceX is not a competitor, they're actually one of our partners. And what SpaceX is allowing us to do, SpaceX is going to concentrate on taking our astronauts up and down the space station. So that'll allow NASA to concentrate on the harder things, like going to Mars, you know, and beyond. So we can put a lot of our efforts into that. So I'm excited to be part of that initiative, and that's what I do on a day-to-day basis.
You got still a good run to go at NASA. Do you think we'll be doing the Mars thing before you hang it up?
Probably not.
Really?
I'm hoping maybe some of the kids here, that maybe they'll be part of that Mars mission. Some of your students here, some of the students here at Embry-Riddle.
When you see what SpaceX is doing, do people at NASA say they're taking the play? That used to be us, now it's them.
There is a little bit of that. There is a little bit of that. But it's still bringing excitement and awareness to the space program, and that's what it's about. I encourage, you know, I would love to build my own rocket in my backyard and go into space too. If I could afford it like he does, put my own car up in orbit, I mean, that would be cool too.
When's the next time you're diving?
I think in a few weeks. Actually, I just went diving this past weekend. We do a program, we do a snorkel with the manatees every year in the Crystal River. We bring a bunch of kids down there and we snorkel with the manatees. We just did that last week, and I think we're diving Epcot.
Oh, nice.
In March. We like to do that every year. Get the people back into the water before the dive season really kicks off.
I think you were recognized nationally with an award in 2009, am I correct?
Well, our organization was.
Yeah.
We received an award for our volunteer efforts. We received the Take Pride in America Award, and that was awarded by the Department of Interior for our volunteer efforts. And what's really cool about that, we actually got a chance to go to Washington, D.C. to receive that award, and we got a tour of the White House. We didn't meet the president at the time. I was a little disappointed, but to get the tour of the White House, that was very cool.
Good for you. I want to thank some people who work with us tonight. Jasmine and Danielle, who handled camera and photography, to Tony Petro, who runs every one of these. I thank you. And to Ken Hunt for his friendship and guidance with diversity and inclusion. I want to tell you about our next event before you all go tonight. When we come back on the 20th, Miles O'Brien, many of you knew him from his work at CNN. He's going to be talking about the untold story of aviation and the media. He is, of course, an independent now, and he'll be here. Get here early. Students, of course, are going to be here. The general public is welcome, free and open to the public. And we're looking forward to a very special night with Miles O'Brien.
He's a big advocate of the space program.
There you go.
Big advocate.
Ladies and gentlemen, once again, a round of applause for our guest tonight, Erik Denson.
Thank you.
Thank you. And have a pleasant evening, everyone.